My name is Richard Miller. I'm 67, and I thought I had done everything right. I worked hard, saved every dollar, and believed my family would be there when life got rough. But one ordinary envelope on my kitchen counter exposed a truth that left me shaken with my entire savings gone. I turned to my son, hoping for comfort, only to hear words no parent should ever hear. What followed that Thanksgiving revealed secrets and betrayals I never thought possible. And the moment I uncovered the truth, every smile at that dinner table froze. The letter from the bank sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally forced myself to tear it open. I told myself it was just another statement, maybe an update about interest rates, nothing urgent. But deep down, I knew it wasn't routine. I felt it in the way my chest tightened every time I walked past that envelope, in the way my late wife Helen's picture on the wall seemed to watch me as if urging me to face it. When I finally unfolded the paper, my hands shook so badly I could barely focus on the words. The numbers leapt out at me first. Account balance 0. I read it again, blinking, thinking maybe I had misread. 0. $280,000, the savings I had built slowly and carefully over 25 years gone. The retirement I had counted on after leaving my engineering job at the Cleveland plant gone. Every trip Helen and I had dreamed about, every safety net for medical bills, every emergency cushion gone. The paper slipped from my hands onto the linoleum floor. I sat heavily in the kitchen chair, staring at the stains on the counter where Helen used to set down her coffee mug. The silence of the house pressed against me like a weight. For a long time, I just sat there, unable to move, feeling as though the ground had been yanked from under me. I tried calling the bank that afternoon, my voice cracking as I stumbled through the automated prompts until a clerk finally answered. She was polite, too polite the way people are when they have bad news. She explained the withdrawals had been authorized, verified by someone with access. Large sums taken out in several transactions throughout the past year. I tried to argue to say it must have been a mistake, but the line was cold with certainty. The money was gone, and it wasn't coming back. I hung up the phone and pressed my forehead into my hands. The room smelled faintly of old coffee grounds and dust, the smell of a house lived in by one person too long. I wanted to believe there had been an error, that tomorrow a manager would call me and apologize. But a darker thought crept in, one I kept trying to push away. Who else had access? For years, Michael had helped me with online banking. I wasn't good with computers, never had been. Helen used to laugh when I fumbled with a television remote, let alone a computer. Michael had set up the accounts, the passwords showed me where to click. He was my son. I trusted him completely. The thought made me sick, so I pushed it aside. Maybe it was some stranger, some hacker. That seemed easier to swallow than the idea of my own blood taking from me. I tried to distract myself with small chores, wiping down the counters, folding laundry, watering the one plant that still clung to life in the window. But nothing stopped the gnawing in my gut. As dusk settled over Cleveland that evening, the neighborhood glowed with early Christmas lights strung along porches. Families were already preparing for the holiday season. Thanksgiving was just a week away. I should have been looking forward to turkey and laughter, but instead, I felt nothing but dread. Helen used to say the holidays were meant to hold families together, even through the hard years. But sitting alone in that dim kitchen, I felt further from family than I ever had. I thought of calling Emily, my daughter. She lived across town with her husband and 2 kids. She had her own stresses, her teaching job, the kids' endless activities. I didn't want to drop this on her just yet. Besides, I told myself I still had Michael. He was my oldest. He had struggled here and there, but he was family. Surely he would understand if I asked to stay with him a few days while I figured things out. I picked up the phone, hesitated, then set it down again. The words I wanted to say felt too heavy. How could I explain that I had lost everything, that the safety net was gone, that I was afraid of spending the holidays in an empty house with nothing but silence? I poured myself a cup of coffee, though it had long gone cold, and stared out at the neighbor's porch light flickering against the falling dark. I tried to imagine Helen sitting across from me, her steady hands wrapped around her mug, her voice calm and sure. She would tell me to stop running from the truth, to speak plainly, to lean on the children if I needed to. She always said I carried too much alone. So I reached for the phone again, pressed Michael's number with a trembling finger, and listened to the dial tone ring out in the quiet of my kitchen. That was how it all began. The morning after that phone call, I woke to a house that felt colder than usual, though the furnace clicked on the way it always did. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the half-empty pot of coffee, my mind replaying Michael's words in a loop. "You are just a burden." The sting of them clung to me more sharply than the November chill seeping through the windows. I forced myself to get dressed, pulling on a sweater Helen had knit years ago. The yarn stretched thin at the elbows. I couldn't stay buried in silence all day. My body needed air movement, something to keep the walls from pressing in. So I walked outside, down the cracked sidewalk, past yards where neighbors had already staked inflatable turkeys and tangled strings of lights. My own lawn looked bare, neglected. I hadn't bothered with decorations since Helen passed. Across the street, Roy Henderson was kneeling by his mailbox, fumbling with a wrench. He looked up, his weathered face lighting in recognition. Roy had lived 2 doors down since my kids were small. He had seen Michael ride his bike for the first time, seen Emily head to prom in a borrowed dress. He knew too much of our history for me to hide behind polite greetings. "Morning, Richard," he called, dusting his hands on his jeans. "You look like hell." I tried to smile, but it faltered. "Rough night," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I meant. Roy studied me for a moment, then jerked his head toward his porch. "Come sit a while. Coffee is still hot." I hesitated, but the thought of sitting in another silent kitchen broke me down. I followed him across his yard. His porch smelled faintly of cedar and old tobacco. Inside, his living room was neat to the point of military precision. Photographs lined the mantel, most of them of Roy in uniform, younger leaners standing beside tanks and grinning comrades. "Sit," he said, motioning to the recliner. I lowered myself into it, grateful for the warmth radiating from his heater. Roy brought 2 mugs from the kitchen. The coffee was strong, bitter, the way he liked it. He sat across from me, his eyes steady. "You want to tell me what's going on, or should I just guess?" For a long moment, I kept my gaze on the steam curling from my cup. My throat tightened as I tried to swallow words that felt heavier than steel. Finally, I said, "The money is gone, Roy. All of it." His brow furrowed. "Savings?" I nodded. 25 years worth. Every penny." Roy let out a low whistle. "That's one hell of a blow." How I shook my head. "Bank says it was authorized withdrawals. Someone with access." Roy's jaw worked as he considered that. "And who has access besides you?" I couldn't bring myself to say Michael's name out loud. My silence was enough. Roy leaned back, sighing through his nose. "Listen, I don't want to stick my nose where it doesn't belong, but I've seen your boy around. More than once." I looked up sharply. Seen him where Roy hesitated, his eyes narrowing, weighing whether to speak. Then he said, "Out at Riverside Casino. Couple nights last month, and before that too." He was walking in like a man who knew his way around. My stomach sank. Michael at the casino. My mind replayed the withdrawals Kaplan had hinted at when I'd spoken with him years earlier about estate planning. Though back then, it was only a caution. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. "You sure it was him?" I asked, my voice breaking. Roy nodded firmly. Tall kid, dark hair. Same walk he's had since high school. I don't mistake faces. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands against them until stars sparked. The memory of Helen's warning came rushing back. You trust people too much, Richard. I wanted to deny it to defend my son. But the image of him walking through casino doors with money that wasn't his lodged in my mind like a splinter. Roy's voice softened. I don't say this to hurt you, but a man doesn't buy a shiny new truck on a mechanic's salary, not these days. I thought of the Ford F-150 I had noticed parked in Michael's driveway a few weeks earlier, gleaming like it had just rolled off the lot. I had admired it, even felt a touch of pride thinking he was finally doing well. Now the pride curdled into shame. I took a shaky breath. Helen always said family is what holds us up. What if she was wrong about him? Roy leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Maybe she wasn't wrong about family. Maybe she was just wrong about who would be there when it counts. The weight of his words settled over me. I stared into my mug, the coffee cooling quickly. Roy let the silence stretch a moment before he said, You ought to look into it proper. Don't take my word alone. But if I were you, I'd start asking questions. I nodded slowly, my chest heavy with dread. The clock on Roy's wall ticked loudly in the pause that followed. I realized I had been clutching the mug so tightly, my knuckles were white. Setting it down, I rose, feeling suddenly unsteady on my feet. Thanks for the coffee, Roy, I managed. Anytime, he said, following me to the door. And Richard, don't carry it all alone. I stepped back into the crisp air, the sun weak behind a curtain of gray clouds. My breath came in shallow puffs as I walked home. The neighborhood looked the same as always. Children's bikes strewn across lawns, a dog barking in the distance, holiday decorations fluttering. But inside me, everything had shifted. Michael at the casino. Michael with access to my accounts. Michael with a brand new truck. The thought I had tried so hard to bury now pressed against me from all sides, impossible to ignore. I closed my front door behind me and leaned against it, the weight of suspicion heavier than anything I had ever carried. The house was quiet again, too quiet, and I found myself staring at Helen's photograph on the mantel. Her smile frozen in time, her eyes steady as if waiting for me to face the truth. I sank into the chair at my kitchen table, the envelope from the bank still lying there, crumpled now. My hand hovered over the phone. I knew the next step, though my heart resisted it. I needed more than suspicions. I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to go to find them. The glass doors of Kaplan and Associates glinted in the weak November sun as I pulled them open and stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper, and the click of my shoes echoed against the tile. I felt small standing there, clutching a worn folder with every bank statement I had collected over the years, each one once a quiet reassurance that my future was secure. Now those papers felt more like gravestones. The receptionist, a young woman with neatly pinned hair, glanced up from her computer. "Can I help you, sir?" I cleared my throat, my voice raspier than I intended. "I have an appointment with David Kaplan." She nodded, checked something on her screen, then gestured toward the row of leather chairs. "He'll be right out. Please have a seat." I lowered myself into one of the chairs, my knees stiff from the chill outside. My heart drummed in my chest louder than the muted hum of printers in the back. I kept telling myself this was just a formality, a check for peace of mind, but in truth, I already knew. Roy's words about the casino clung to me like smoke. After a few minutes, a tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped out, his expression calm but alert. "Mr. Miller, I'm David Kaplan. Come on back." His office was lined with shelves of thick legal binders, the kind that seemed to hold entire lives inside. He closed the door gently behind us and motioned for me to sit across from his desk. "So what brings you in today?" I handed him the folder, my hands trembling. "My savings account. It's all gone. $280,000. The bank says the withdrawals were authorized. Kaplan opened the folder, sliding out the papers with practiced hands. His eyes moved quickly over the statements, page after page. I watched his brow tighten as he traced the pattern of withdrawals. Large sums spread over months, not random. This was deliberate, he said finally, and consistent too. I leaned forward, my voice hoarse. Can you tell who did it? He looked up, his gaze steady. The authorization logs show it was someone with online access, someone trusted. You're the primary, but it looks like a secondary login was used. My chest clenched. Michael had set those accounts up for me years ago. I had never thought twice about it. Kaplan continued. The withdrawals were often clustered near weekends, sometimes the day before deposits from your pension. And the cash ended up routed through ATMs in areas near Riverside Casino and a dealership over on Brook Park Road. A dealership. The words caught in my throat. I had seen Michael's truck new, shining, the kind of vehicle a man like me could never afford on a fixed income. Kaplan leaned back slightly, choosing his words. Mr. Miller, in cases like this, it's often someone close. Someone who knows your habits, who knows when you'll be home and when you won't. I stared at the carpet, the pattern blurring. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. My son, my boy, who I taught to fish in Lake Erie, who I drove to his first job interview, who I watched walk down the aisle with Laura. My voice broke when I finally asked, if it is him, what happens now? Kaplan folded his hands. Legally, you have options. We can file a report, start an investigation, even pursue charges if you choose. But it's a long process, and it can tear families apart. You should be sure before we move forward. Tear families apart, as if they weren't already coming undone. I pressed my palms against my knees, forcing myself to stand. Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. I need some time. He nodded gently, sliding the papers back into the folder. Keep these safe, Richard, and think carefully about your next step. Outside, the wind cut against my face as I walked back to the car. The parking lot blurred around me, my hands gripping the folder so tightly the cardboard bent. I sank into the driver's seat and sat there, the steering wheel cold under my fingers. The pieces fit too well. Michael with access. Michael at the casino. Michael's new truck. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to believe there was another explanation. But the evidence was circling me like vultures. On the drive home, the streets of Cleveland felt foreign, every familiar building now part of a landscape I no longer trusted. Families bustled in and out of grocery stores preparing for the holiday, their carts piled high with turkeys and pies. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were, their biggest worry, a missing can of cranberries instead of a missing life savings. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as always, shingles in need of repair, the porch light flickering. But stepping inside, I felt like I was walking into an empty shell. I placed the folder on the table next to Helen's photograph. Her smile seemed to plead with me for courage. I whispered to the empty room. What have we raised Helen? What have we done wrong? The kettle whistled on the stove, though I couldn't remember setting it there. My hands moved automatically, pouring hot water over a tea bag, watching the color bleed into the cup. The simple act steadied me, though not enough to quiet the pounding in my chest. I carried the tea to the living room, lowered myself into Helen's old armchair, and stared at the shadows gathering across the walls. The weight of proof pressed down on me heavier than I could bear alone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I could not carry it in silence. Someone else needed to hear the truth, and I knew exactly who that had to be. Emily's number sat on my phone screen for a long time before I pressed call. My finger hovered my chest tight, but I knew there was no one else I could trust with this. The line rang 3 times before her voice answered, warm and a little rushed, like it always was when she was between classes. "Dad, is everything all right?" For a second I almost lied, told her I was fine. But my throat burned with the weight of silence I had carried too long. "No, honey, it isn't." "Do you have a few minutes?" She must have heard something in my voice, because she immediately said yes. And within the hour, I was pulling into her driveway on the west side of Cleveland. The house was modest, with kids' bikes leaning against the porch and chalk drawings fading on the walkway. It smelled like baked bread and crayons when I stepped inside. Emily wrapped me in a hug that lingered longer than usual. "You look pale, Dad. What's going on?" I sat at her kitchen table, the same kind of sturdy oak Helen used to insist on, and set the folder Kaplan had given me on the surface. She waited while I gathered myself. "My savings are gone, Em. Every last cent. $280,000. Her hand flew to her mouth. Gone. How I swallowed hard. Withdrawals over months. The bank said they were authorized. Kaplan confirmed it was someone with access. Emily frowned, her brow creasing the way it had when she was a little girl concentrating on homework. "Michael." The word cut sharper than I expected. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. He had the access. Kaplan traced the withdrawals to ATMs near Riverside Casino and a dealership. Emily slumped back in her chair, shaking her head. "Dad, I need to tell you something." I looked at her, waiting, my stomach already turning. She lowered her voice. "Last month I overheard Laura talking to a friend at the kids' soccer game. She was bragging about how lucky they were that Michael's dad had money to spare. She said with a smirk that soon she would not have to worry about bills. I thought it was just her running her mouth. But now..." The room spun slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table. So she knew. Emily nodded firmly. She knew Dad. Maybe she even pushed him. Her husband, Mark, walked in just then, wiping his hands on a towel. He caught sight of our faces and stopped short. "What happened?" Emily explained quickly, her voice rising with anger. Mark's jaw tightened as he listened. "We're with you, Richard," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone." The kindness in his voice nearly broke me. For weeks I had been suffocating under suspicion and shame. Hearing that someone still stood on my side loosened something inside my chest. But a heavy dread followed. What happens if I confront him? What happens when I tell him I know? Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You cannot carry this by yourself. If Michael did this, he has to face it. And Laura, too." I wanted to argue to protect the memory of the boy I had raised, but the evidence stacked higher than my defenses. Mark cleared his throat. "Thanksgiving is next week. They are hosting dinner, right?" I nodded slowly. "Then maybe that is when this comes out. Everyone will be there. No denying, no hiding." The thought of a confrontation in front of family made my stomach twist. But deep down, I knew it might be the only way. I left Emily's house that evening, with the folder pressed against my chest, the autumn air biting at my skin. The sky over Cleveland was streaked with the orange of a fading sunset, and I felt both heavier and strangely lighter. Heavier because the truth was sinking in, lighter because I no longer bore it alone. As I drove back through the quiet streets, passing houses where warm lights glowed behind curtains, I imagined Helen sitting beside me, her steady presence filling the silence. She would have been proud of Emily, proud that at least one of our children held on to the values we tried to teach. Pulling into my driveway, I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling motor. The house loomed ahead, dark and too quiet, the porch light flickering. Inside, the air smelled stale, untouched. I set the folder on the coffee table and lowered myself into Helen's old armchair. My thoughts circled Michael, his laughter as a boy when I pushed him on a swing, the pride in his eyes when he fixed his first car engine. How did that boy become a man who could look at his father and take everything? The question pressed down on me as I stared at the shadows creeping along the walls. I knew there was no going back to before. The only path left was forward, and it would lead me straight into a storm. The following Saturday, I pulled into Michael's driveway without calling ahead. The November wind cut across the yard, carrying with it the sharp scent of burning leaves from somewhere down the block. My heart thudded against my ribs as I sat there for a moment, staring at the shiny Ford F-150 parked squarely in front of the house. The truck glistened as if it had been waxed, that morning chrome catching every scrap of light. It was the kind of truck you bought outright, not the kind you made payments on for years. I finally forced myself out of the car, clutching the folder Kaplan had given me under my arm. Laura opened the door before I could knock. She wore a fitted sweater and jeans. Her nails perfectly painted her smile bright but cold. "Richard, what a surprise," she said, though her tone carried more annoyance than warmth. "Is Michael home?" I asked, adjusting my grip on the folder. "He is out running errands," she replied quickly, stepping aside. "But come in." The warmth of their house hit me instantly, mingled with the scent of cinnamon candles. The living room was spotless, decorated with new furniture I had never seen before. A leather sectional stretched across the wall, a massive flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace. Everything gleamed with newness, nothing carried the wear of years like my own furniture at home. Laura fussed with a throw pillow as I stepped inside. "Can I get you coffee?" "No, thank you," I said. My eyes scanning the room, my gaze caught on a stack of envelopes, half hidden beneath a glossy magazine on the counter. Without thinking, I walked closer, pretending to look at a photo frame while my eyes skimmed the paper peeking out. A dealership logo printed in bold blue letters stared back at me, Brook Park Ford. The same dealership Kaplan had mentioned. Laura's voice cut into the air, a little too sharp. "What are you looking at?" I straightened slowly, forcing a steady voice. "Just admiring how nice the place looks." Her smile tightened. "We've been lucky lately," she said, smoothing her hair. "Michael's been working so hard." "Lucky?" The word burned in my chest. She moved toward the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. My eyes roamed the room again. On the edge of the counter, a small slip of paper lay near the fruit bowl. The bold print made my stomach drop. Riverside Casino. A betting stub folded in half, but unmistakable. I reached for it before I could stop myself. My fingers brushed the paper. Laura's voice snapped behind me. "That is private." I turned, holding the slip between my fingers. "Casino," I said softly. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressing together. "Put it down, Richard." I placed the slip back on the counter, my hand trembling. I felt her eyes boring into me, daring me to challenge her. Michael finally came through the door, then the sound of his boots heavy on the hardwood. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I turned toward him, my heart racing. His jacket smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, something he had never touched when he lived under my roof. He looked startled to see me standing there, more startled to see Laura frozen near the counter. I wanted to ask about the truck, the casino, the missing money, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I forced a weak smile. "Thought I'd drop by, see how you're doing." Michael's eyes darted to Laura, then back to me. "We're fine, Dad. Busy, but fine." I nodded, though my hands clenched around the folder. "I noticed your truck out front. Looks brand new." His shoulders stiffened. "Yeah, well, I got a good deal." I glanced at the counter at the dealership envelope half hidden beneath the magazine. "And paid cash, I imagine." Michael's face hardened, his jaw tightening. "What are you implying?" Laura stepped in quickly, her hand brushing his arm. "He isn't implying anything, Michael." I met my son's eyes searching for the boy I had raised. I wanted to find honesty there, remorse, something human. But what stared back at me was guarded and cold. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to stop by. Michael looked relieved, though he tried to mask it. All right, Dad. Take care. As I stepped outside, the chill bit through my sweater. The Ford gleamed beside me, mocking me with its shine. I touched the hood lightly, the metal cold under my fingers, and whispered under my breath, "That truck was bought with my life." Driving home, the folder lay untouched on the passenger seat. My chest ached with the weight of what I had seen. The casino stub, the dealership paper, Laura's sharpened tone. None of it was proof by itself, but together, it screamed louder than words. I pulled into my driveway just as the first flakes of snow drifted down, melting as they hit the ground. Inside my house, the silence closed around me again. I dropped the folder onto the table and sat heavily in Helen's armchair. My hands shook as I poured a glass of water, staring at the ripple across the surface. Proof or not, the truth was closing in. And I knew I could not ignore it any longer. The next morning, I drove across town to Emily's place, the folder heavy on the seat beside me. The streets were damp from an overnight drizzle, the sky low and gray, as if the whole city was bracing for something it didn't want to face. When I pulled into her driveway, the kids' bikes were still scattered across the lawn, bright splashes of color against the dull November day. Emily opened the door before I could knock, her hair pulled back, an apron dusted with flour tied around her waist. "Dad?" She said, her face softening when she saw me. "Come in." I stepped into the warmth of her kitchen, the smell of cinnamon rolls filling the air. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in, remembering how Helen used to bake on Sunday mornings. My chest ached with longing. Emily guided me to the table, wiping her hands on the apron. "You look worse than last time. Sit. Tell me what happened." I set the folder on the table and pushed it toward her. She pulled out the papers, her eyes scanning the pages, her face tightening with every line. I told her about Laura's pointed smile, about the truck in the driveway, about the casino slip sitting bold as daylight on their counter. When I finished, Emily's hands were clenched around the folder. Her voice trembled. I knew it. I knew she was behind this. Behind it, maybe. But Michael let it happen, I said, my throat tight. Her eyes filled with tears, but they burned with anger too. Dad, he didn't just let it happen. He chose it. And she's right there, cheering him on. I rubbed my temples, the weight of it pressing harder. Mark came in then, carrying a bag of groceries. He set it down, looked between us, and asked quietly, "More bad news?" Emily's voice cracked. "It's true, Mark. Michael's been using Dad's savings. Laura's part of it too." Mark let out a long breath, then pulled out a chair and sat. His eyes met mine. "You can't let them get away with this, Richard." I stared at the table, at the little scratches from years of family meals. My voice came out low. "What do I do, Mark? Call the police on my own son?" Emily reached across the table and gripped my hand. "If you stay silent, he'll keep taking. He'll drag you down with him." The kitchen clock ticked loud in the pause that followed. I wanted to believe Michael was still the boy who used to sneak into the kitchen late at night for cookies, the boy who begged me to teach him how to drive. But the image of that betting slip burned through those memories. Mark's voice was steady. "Thanksgiving is next week. They're hosting dinner. Maybe that's when this comes out. With everyone there, they can't twist the story." Emily nodded, her eyes fierce. "If Laura tries to cover for him, I'll call her out myself." The thought of it made my stomach twist, but I couldn't deny the truth in their words. Hiding had gotten me nowhere. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the kids' chalk drawings fading on the walkway. Bright suns, crooked houses, smiling stick figures. Family the way it was supposed to be. When I turned back, Emily was wiping her eyes, her jaw set. "I'll stand with you, Dad, no matter how ugly it gets." Her words filled me with both sorrow and gratitude. At least one child still understood loyalty. I left their house later that afternoon, the folder tucked under my arm. The air outside was sharper now, carrying the faint promise of snow. As I walked to the car, Emily called after me, her voice strong. "Don't let them break you." The drive home was quiet, my thoughts circling like restless birds. I kept seeing Laura's narrowed eyes, Michael's guarded face, Emily's tears. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered stubborn against the growing dark. Inside, the house felt smaller than ever, its silence echoing around me. I sat at the kitchen table, the folders spread open, again the papers whispering accusations. My eyes drifted to Helen's photograph on the mantel. She smiled back calm and steady, as if reminding me that some truths could not be buried. I rested my hands flat on the table, the wood cool beneath my palms, and drew a long breath. The time for silence was over. I woke the next morning with a heaviness that clung to my chest. The sky outside was a dull stretch of gray, and the sound of a distant snowblower carried across the neighborhood. I made myself a pot of coffee, though it tasted like cardboard, and stared at the stack of papers Kaplan had given me. Numbers and transactions blurred together, all pointing in the same direction. I couldn't keep this locked inside anymore. When I stepped out to clear the leaves from the porch, I spotted Nancy Peterson across the street. She was bundled in a quilted coat, tugging at the leash of her little terrier. Nancy was the kind of neighbor who paid attention, the kind who saw the details most others missed. She raised her hand in a wave, then veered across the street. "Morning, Richard," she called, her breath puffing in the cold air. I leaned on the rake, trying to muster a smile. "Morning, Nancy." She reached me, her dog sniffing at my boots, and lowered her voice. "I've been meaning to ask, is everything all right? You've looked worn down lately." I let out a weak laugh. "Guess age is catching up?" Her eyes narrowed with concern. "It's more than that, and I don't want to stick my nose where it doesn't belong. But there's something you should know." The rake slipped slightly in my hands. "What is it?" Nancy glanced around, though the street was empty. "I've seen Michael's car parked in your driveway a lot this past year. Times when I knew you weren't home. Once or twice in the middle of the night. He had a key, right?" The words landed like a blow. My mouth went dry. "Yes, I gave him one after Helen passed in case of emergencies." Nancy pressed her lips together. "Maybe he was helping out, but it didn't look like just a quick stop. He'd be there a while." A cold sweat broke out across my back. "That's not all," she added, her voice tight. "I saw Laura at the mall a few months ago showing off a diamond ring to her friend. She laughed and said she was lucky her father-in-law took care of things. The way she said it, smug, like she was bragging about money that wasn't hers. I gripped the rake so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Thank you, Nancy," I managed. "I appreciate you telling me." Her face softened. "I wish it were better news. You don't deserve this, Richard." She gave my arm a squeeze before heading back across the street, her terrier trotting beside her. I stood rooted to the spot, the wind biting at my face, the snow beginning to fall in slow flakes. Back inside, the house felt smaller than ever. I laid the rake by the door and sank into the kitchen chair. My hands trembled as I opened the folder again, spreading out the papers. The dealership invoice, the casino slip now, Nancy's words layering over it all. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a pattern, a picture that grew darker by the day. I poured a glass of water and stared at the ripples trembling across the surface. My son had taken from me. My daughter-in-law had flaunted it. The life Helen and I had built, the future we had planned, had been gutted by the very people who should have stood beside me. The phone rang, startling me. Emily's name lit the screen. I answered, my voice rough. "Dad," she said, "I've been thinking. Thanksgiving is only a few days away. If you want to confront Michael, that's the moment. Everyone will be there. He won't be able to twist the truth with all of us watching." Her conviction steadied me even as my chest tightened. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "Yes, you are," Emily said firmly. "You don't have to do it alone. Mark and I will be right there." I closed my eyes, her words washing over me. "All right," I whispered. After we hung up, I sat in silence. Outside, the snow fell heavier now, softening the edges of the street, the roofs, the trees. The world looked clean and quiet, while inside me, everything was jagged and loud. That evening, I saw Roy across the street and crossed over my boots, crunching in the fresh snow. He was clearing his walk with a shovel, his breath rising in steady clouds. "You holding up, Richard?" he asked, pausing to lean on the handle. "Barely," I admitted. "Nancy told me she saw Michael at my place when I wasn't home. She even saw Laura bragging about money." Roy shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, friend. I wish I could say I'm surprised. But I told you before, I've seen him at Riverside. More than once." I swallowed hard, the cold air burning my lungs. Roy leaned closer. "Don't let this eat you alive. If you're going to face him, do it where he can't deny it." "Thanksgiving," I muttered. Roy gave a slow nod. "Then that's where you take your stand." Back home, I lit the small lamp in the living room and pulled Helen's photograph from the mantel. I held it in my hands, tracing the edges of the frame with my thumb. Her smile was steady, her eyes kind, as if she already knew the path I was on. I whispered into the quiet room, "I won't let them steal what we built. I promise you that." The snow continued to fall outside, covering the neighborhood in silence. I sat there for a long time, the photo resting in my lap, the folder spread open on the table. Every detail screamed louder than the last, until the truth pressed down on me so hard it felt like a storm breaking inside my chest. And I knew there was no turning back. The night before Thanksgiving, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows and the faint ticking of the old clock on the dresser. My mind ran in circles, replaying Nancy's words. Kaplan's files, Roy's warnings, Emily's encouragement. Every thread led to the same place, and the weight of what I had to do pressed on me like a stone. By morning, the sky was pale and heavy with clouds, the kind that promised snow before nightfall. I showered, shaved, put on my best wool sweater, and tried to steady my hands as I buttoned the cuffs. The mirror showed a face older than I remembered, lined and weary, but behind the eyes there was something harder now. I was done being silent. Emily called around 10. "Dad, are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure," I said, though my voice betrayed a tremor. "All right. We'll meet you there. You won't be alone." I clung to her words as I drove across town. The houses were strung with early Christmas lights, wreaths already on doors, the world pretending to be festive. My stomach churned. When I pulled up in front of Michael's house, I sat for a full minute gripping the steering wheel, watching the smoke from chimneys drift into the cold air. Then I stepped out. The door opened before I even knocked. Laura stood there in a burgundy dress, her smile tight and too polished. "Richard, come in. You're just in time." Inside, the house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles, but beneath it was a sharp edge, something false. Laughter spilled from the dining room, the sound of clinking glasses, children squealing. Michael appeared, cheeks flushed from drink. "Dad, glad you made it." His tone was cheerful, but his eyes darted away from mine. I followed him into the dining room. The long table was set with china Helen had given them years ago, every place filled. Laura's parents were there, cousins I hadn't seen in years, even the pastor from their church. My seat was at the far end, isolated, as if they'd already decided where I belonged. I sat quietly through the first course, pushing cranberry sauce around my plate. Conversations buzzed over me, laughter too loud, Laura chiming in with a story about their new car, her diamond ring glinting as she gestured. Michael boasted about a business deal, his voice carrying over everyone else's. I caught Emily's eyes across the table. She gave me a small nod. Now. I set my fork down and cleared my throat. The sound silenced the room. Glasses stilled, forks paused, all eyes turned toward me. I've got something to say. I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Michael frowned. Dad, maybe later. No. Now. The air tightened. I pulled Kaplan's folder from my bag and laid it on the table. These are records of my accounts, the savings your mother and I built over 40 years. Every cent gone. And here I tapped the casino slip is where a chunk of it went. Murmurs rippled. Laura's face drained of color. Michael laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. I turned to Nancy, who sat 2 seats down. Would you tell them what you told me? She hesitated, then spoke clearly. I saw Michael's car at Richard's house several times when he wasn't home. And I saw Laura at the mall bragging about money from him. A hush fell so deep I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. Laura snapped, "That's a lie." But Michael's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around his glass. I leaned forward. You called me a burden when I asked for help. You said I was just another mouth to feed. But you had no trouble feeding off my life's savings. Gasps broke around the table. Laura's mother dropped her fork. The pastor shifted uncomfortably. Michael slammed his glass down. That's enough. No, I said, my voice rising. Enough is you stealing from your own father, gambling with the money your mother and I saved for family. Enough is lying to my face while your wife flaunts rings and clothes bought with my blood and sweat. Emily's husband, Mark, spoke up. We've seen the bank statements too. It all lines up, Michael. The room fractured into whispers and accusations. Laura tried to defend herself, but her words tangled into excuses. Michael pushed back his chair, his face blotched red. You think you can humiliate me like this in front of everyone I stood? Humiliation comes from your own choices, not mine. The silence that followed was thicker than any sermon I'd ever heard. Even the children had gone still, their wide eyes fixed on their father. Laura hissed under her breath. You should have burned those papers. And that was when the last thread snapped. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. I felt every eye on me, the weight of judgment shifting not to me, but to them. The turkey grew cold on the plates, the candles flickered, and for the first time in months I felt the sharp sting of justice beginning to cut through the lies. Michael opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. He lowered his gaze, his hands trembling on the tablecloth. I stayed standing, my palms flat against the folder, the storm of whispers swelling again, rising and breaking like waves. And I knew this was only the beginning. The voices around the table rose into a storm the moment I sat back down. Cousins whispered to each other. Laura's mother fanned herself with a napkin as if the air had grown heavy, and the pastor cleared his throat so many times it sounded like a warning bell. Michael sat rigid, his fists clenched tight while Laura leaned into him, her eyes sharp and defiant. Emily broke the tension first. Dad's not lying. I've seen the statements. She looked straight at Michael. How could you do this to him? Michael's chair scraped back as he stood. Enough. You don't get it. None of you do. His voice cracked at the edges, the confidence that usually carried him in a room slipping away. Roy, who had come as a family friend, set down his glass and leaned forward. I think we get it just fine, son. You took what wasn't yours. Laura shot him a glare. "Stay out of it. This is family business." Roy didn't flinch. When a man robs his own father, it becomes more than family business. Michael's eyes darted from face to face, searching for an ally, but the room gave him nothing. Finally, he muttered, "Let's eat before everything gets cold." But the turkey sat untouched. No one had an appetite anymore. Every bite would have tasted of betrayal. The pastor folded his hands and spoke quietly. "Michael, truth has a way of rising. Best to face it now rather than let it drown you later." Laura scoffed, pulling her napkin from her lap and tossing it onto the table. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this nonsense." She stood abruptly, the diamond on her finger catching the light like a cruel reminder. Michael followed, grabbing her arm. "Sit down, Laura." Her voice cut like glass. "No. If your father wants a show, let him put it on without me." She stormed from the room, heels striking the floor in angry rhythm. The front door slammed a moment later, leaving silence in her wake. Michael sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. "Dad, you don't understand. I was trying to fix things. I thought if I could just turn it around, at the tables no one would ever know. I felt something inside me break. You gambled away your mother's savings, Michael. 40 years of sacrifice. That was never yours to risk." His eyes flashed with desperation. "I just needed one win. Just one." The cousins muttered among themselves, their eyes full of judgment. Laura's parents exchanged looks that spoke louder than words. Even the children had retreated to a corner, whispering with wide eyes, the innocence of the holiday shattered. Emily's husband Mark spoke with quiet force. "One win doesn't rebuild trust. It destroys it." Michael's gaze fell to his plate. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time all night, he looked small. I stood slowly, the weight of every eye in the room following me. "You called me a burden." I said, my voice low but steady. "You told me you didn't need another mouth to feed. But all this time you were feeding off me." Michael's face crumpled, but I couldn't stop. "Do you know what it feels like to bury your wife and cling to the hope that the family you raised will stand by you, only to find out that same family is the one who emptied your life when you were at your weakest?" His lips trembled. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Intent doesn't erase damage," I said. "Choices do." The pastor rose slowly, his presence commanding without being loud. "It is clear this family needs air. Let us step away from the table before more harm is done." Chairs scraped back as people stood, some retreating to the living room, others whispering as they slipped into the kitchen. Emily stayed beside me, her hand light on my arm. Michael remained seated, head bowed, shoulders hunched. The room that had once buzzed with Thanksgiving cheer now felt like a courtroom, every silence another judgment. I picked up the folder and tucked it under my arm. My work here wasn't finished, but the first crack had split the dam. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall again, tapping against the window like a steady drum. I stared at Michael, knowing this night had only peeled back the first layer of truth. And as I felt the cold draft from the front door where Laura had stormed out, I knew the storm had only begun to break. The house felt hollow after Laura left, her absence louder than her shouting had been. People drifted into smaller groups, their voices hushed glances, flicking between Michael and me as if waiting for the next strike of lightning. The turkey sat untouched in the middle of the table, steam gone, a monument to a holiday ruined. Michael stayed hunched in his chair, staring into his lap. His hands shook, though whether from anger, fear, or shame I couldn't tell. Emily leaned toward me, her voice a whisper. "Dad, maybe we should go." "Not yet," I said, keeping my eyes on him. Roy joined us at the end of the table, setting down his glass with deliberate calm. "Michael, you need to hear this." When you steal from strangers, it's a crime. When you steal from your own father, it's a wound that may never heal. Michael lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. You think I don't know that? You think I don't hear that every night? I closed my eyes. Then why keep going, I asked. Why let it snowball until nothing is left? His lips parted, but no words came. Instead, he shoved his chair back and walked into the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet slamming carried back into the dining room. Emily touched my arm again. Dad, please. Let's take this outside before it gets worse. I nodded, and together we followed him. He stood at the counter pouring whiskey into a glass with a shaking hand. The bottle clinked hard against the counter. I never wanted it to go this way, he muttered. I thought I could fix it. Fix it, I repeated, stepping closer. You gutted my accounts. You lied to my face, and you call that fixing it? Michael spun around, his voice raw. What was I supposed to do, Dad? Watch everything fall apart? Laura pushed me. The debts kept piling. You wouldn't understand. I do understand, I said sharply. I lived through recessions, layoffs, hospital bills. Your mother and I built a life by facing problems, not burying them in cards and dice. He slumped against the counter, the glass trembling in his hand. You're right, but I can't undo it now. Emily's voice cut through. You can start by telling the truth. Silence stretched until the only sound was the faint tick of the wall clock. Finally, Michael set the glass down, his shoulders sagging. It wasn't just me. My stomach clenched. What do you mean Laura knew? She found the statements new about the withdrawals. She said if I didn't keep it quiet, she'd tell everyone I couldn't provide. She wanted the money as much as I did. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. All those smug smiles, the jewelry, the new clothes, the vacations. She hadn't just stood by, she had fueled it. Roy's voice was low but firm. That's conspiracy, son. That makes her just as guilty. Michael pressed his palms to his eyes. I don't care what you call it. All I know is I'm in over my head. Before I could answer, the front door banged open again. Laura's heels clicked against the tile as she stormed into the kitchen, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She froze when she saw us, then narrowed her eyes at Michael. Did you tell him Michael's silence was enough? She turned on me, her voice sharp as a blade. You think you can humiliate us in front of everyone? You've ruined everything. I straightened, feeling a steadiness rise inside me. No, Laura. You ruined everything the moment you decided my savings were yours to waste. She laughed bitterly. Those savings, you were never going to spend them. We deserved a better life. The words sliced deep, but they also hardened me. Deserved. That money was my wife's legacy, my work, my life. And you treated it like chips on a table. Emily stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. Mom would be ashamed of you both. Laura's face twisted. Don't you dare talk to me like that. Enough, I said, raising my voice. This ends here. The room went still. Michael leaned heavily against the counter. Laura's fists clenched at her sides, Emily's breath coming fast. Roy broke the silence. Richard, you need to take legal steps. Talking won't solve this. I nodded slowly. For the first time that night, the path ahead was clear, no matter how painful. Laura scoffed and turned toward Michael. If he goes through with this, you'll lose everything. She hissed the words, but I heard them. Michael didn't answer. He just stared into the empty glass on the counter, his face pale, his shoulders collapsing inward. I looked at both of them, the people I had once welcomed as family, and felt the last strands of trust snap. The kitchen light flickered slightly, and in that moment the house seemed smaller, colder. I picked up the folder again, tucked it under my arm, and stepped toward the door. Emily followed me, her hand steadying my arm. Roy trailed behind us, his jaw tight. Behind me, Laura's voice rose again, shrill and bitter. "You'll regret this, old man." I paused at the doorway, but didn't turn back. My voice was quiet but firm. "No. The only regret I have is that it took me this long to see you for what you are." The snow outside had thickened, covering the street in white. The cold hit my face as I stepped out, but it felt cleaner than the air I had left inside. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking, each step carrying me further from the wreckage of that house and closer to the reckoning that waited. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked down the block, each breath visible in the freezing night. My heart pounded not just from the cold, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. I reached my car and sat inside for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting the silence swallow me whole. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I stopped at Kaplan's number. My thumb hovered before I pressed it. The line clicked after 2 rings. "Richard," he said, his voice steady as ever. "I assume things came to a head." "They did," I answered. "Worse than I imagined." They both admitted it, Kaplan, Michael and Laura. He let out a slow exhale. "Then, it is time. Bring me everything you have tomorrow morning. The bank records, the receipts, any statements from witnesses. We will draft a formal complaint." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Do you think he will face charges?" "If the money was taken without your consent, and we can show intent, yes. At the very least, civil restitution. But you need to prepare yourself, Richard. Once this begins, there is no turning back." There was a pause as the words settled in. "I've already lost my savings," I said quietly. "What else is there to lose?" Kaplan's voice softened. "Sometimes peace is worth more than money. Get some rest. I'll see you at 9. The call ended, leaving me in the dark with nothing but the hum of the car heater. I drove home slowly, the snow thickening on the roads. Houses glowed with holiday lights, children's cutouts taped to windows, wreaths heavy with ribbons. It all looked so normal, yet inside me everything had shifted. When I stepped into my house, the quiet pressed down like a blanket. I set the folder on the kitchen table, then walked into the living room. Helen's picture waited on the mantel, her smile frozen in time. I stood there for a long time, whispering the words I had spoken to her so many times before. I hope I'm doing the right thing. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, it was restless, filled with half-formed dreams of doors slamming, money slipping through my fingers, Laura's laughter ringing in my ears. Morning came gray and cold. I dressed in a pressed shirt, packed the folder neatly into a briefcase, and drove downtown to Kaplan's office. The building was old brick, the kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and polish. He greeted me in the lobby and led me into his office lined with shelves of case files. We sat across from each other at the polished oak desk. "Let's go through this step by step," he said, opening the folder. I watched as he spread out the statements, the slips, even the notes I had scribbled in the margins late at night when sleep wouldn't come. "Do you have witnesses?" he asked. I told him about Nancy seeing Michael at my house, about her overhearing Laura at the mall. He made notes, nodding slowly. "That will help." "What happens now?" I asked. "First, I file a civil complaint for restitution. Then we contact law enforcement if necessary. It will not be quick. It will be painful. But it will put you back on the path toward justice." I swallowed hard. "And if he fights it, then it goes to court." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Are you ready for that?" I thought of Michael's face the night before, pale and trembling, and of Laura's venomous words. I thought of Helen's years of sacrifice, of the way Emily had stood beside me, steady and loyal. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm ready." Kaplan gave a small nod. "Then we begin." Hours passed as we compiled everything, filling out forms, signing statements, piecing together the chain of evidence. My hand cramped from writing, but I kept going. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a fragment of what had been stolen. When I left his office, the air outside was sharper, colder, but I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but as though the burden had shifted from silence to action. That evening, Emily stopped by with Mark. She carried a casserole dish, still warm, setting it gently on the counter like it might break. "You did the right thing, Dad," she said, her eyes shining with both worry and pride. Mark clasped my shoulder. "It's not going to be easy, but at least now the truth is out." We ate quietly, the three of us filling the empty kitchen with a little warmth. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely alone. Later, after they left, I sat at the table again, staring at the empty casserole dish, my briefcase by my side. The phone rang, jolting me. I picked it up expecting Emily, but the voice was Michael's. "Dad." His tone was raw, almost broken. "What are you doing?" I closed my eyes, what I should have done months ago. There was a long silence. Then his voice cracked. "You're going to ruin me." "No, Michael. You ruined yourself." The line went dead. I sat there listening to the dial tone, the weight of his words pressing down on me. But beneath it all was something steadier, something that felt like resolve. The night stretched long, but I didn't feel restless this time. I felt ready. And when I finally lay down, the silence of the house no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a pause before the next chapter, a breath before the storm broke fully. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, sharp and cold. And I knew the day had arrived when there would be no more hiding. Kaplan called just after 8 to confirm that the papers had been filed and that Michael and Laura would be served by the end of the week. His voice was steady, reassuring, but when I hung up the phone, my hand still trembled against the receiver. Emily stopped by an hour later. She carried coffee and a bag of muffins, setting them on the table as if we were just sharing an ordinary morning. Her eyes searched mine, worried but proud. "Dad, you look stronger today." I took a sip of the coffee, letting the warmth settle me. "I feel stronger." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us listening to the ticking of the kitchen clock. Finally, she said, "Whatever happens now, you have us." Her words steadied me more than the coffee ever could. By late afternoon, Kaplan called again. Michael had tried to reach him, begging for a way out, but the complaint was already moving forward. Kaplan told him the only chance left was restitution and counseling. But even then, the record would follow him. Laura, on the other hand, had shouted threats and slammed the phone down. I could almost hear her voice in my ear, sharp and cutting. But it no longer had the power it once did. 2 days later, the sheriff's deputy arrived at my son's house to serve the papers. Nancy called me afterward, her voice low with both sadness and relief. "Richard, I saw them on the porch. Laura screaming, Michael pale as a sheet. Everyone on the block heard it. I thanked her, though my heart ached. No father dreams of his child being dragged into shame like this, yet the shame had been earned, and not by me. The weeks that followed moved like winter itself, slow and heavy. Kaplan guided me through hearings and filings, each one another step on a road I never imagined walking. Michael showed up to the first hearing, looking thinner, his hair unkempt, his hands fidgeting at the table. Laura sat beside him, her chin-high eyes flashing at everyone like she was the only victim in the room. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I stood. My voice shook at first, but then it grew stronger. I spoke of Helen's years of sacrifice, of the life we built penny by penny, of the trust we put in our son and the betrayal that followed. I told them about the words he had thrown at me when I asked for help, about the humiliation of being called a burden by my own flesh and blood. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Even the judge's gavel seemed unnecessary. Michael stared at the table, his face gray, while Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat. In the end, the ruling was clear. Restitution would be paid in installments, counseling mandatory financial restrictions placed on both Michael and Laura until the debt was repaid. It was not prison, but it was accountability, and for the first time, I felt the balance begin to tip back toward justice. That evening, I sat with Emily and Mark in their living room, the smell of roast chicken filling the air, children's laughter echoing down the hall. For the first time in months, I felt peace settle in my chest. It was not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of knowing I had not let betrayal define me. Michael called a week later. His voice was broken, stripped of the bravado I had grown so used to. "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "I don't know if you can fix it, son, but you can try, and that begins with honesty." There was silence on the line, then the faint sound of him crying. It was the first time since Helen's funeral that I had heard my son weep. Time passed, the snow-melted spring pushing its way into the neighborhood. Life did not return to what it had been, but it found a rhythm again. I planted Helen's favorite flowers in the front yard. Their bright colors a reminder that even after the hardest winter, something new could grow. I still think of that Thanksgiving night often. Of the faces around the table when the truth broke open, of Laura storming out into the cold, of Michael crumbling under the weight of his choices. It hurt to face, but it set me free. Betrayal had knocked me to the ground, but standing again had given me a strength I didn't know I still had. And now when I walk past the mirror in the hallway, I see not just an old man weathered by loss, but a father who stood for himself, who refused to be erased, who learned that even in the deepest hurt, there can still be justice. If you have ever felt betrayed by the very people you trusted most, I hope my story shows you that silence is not the answer, and that standing up for yourself, no matter how painful, is worth it. Share your thoughts with me in the comments. Let me know if you have lived something similar. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stay here with us because the truth has a way of finding its voice.